The morning mist clung to the Afghan hillside like a wet blanket, making everything look ghostly and uncertain. Sarah Chun adjusted her position behind the spotting scope, careful not to disturb the carefully arranged rocks that provided their concealment. 300 meters below, the village of Karabad stretched along the valley floor, its mud brick houses and narrow streets appearing peaceful in the early light. But peace was an illusion here. Intelligence reports indicated Taliban fighters had been moving through the area for weeks, using the village as a staging point for attacks on coalition convoys traveling the main highway. The sniper team had been in position since 200 hours, well before dawn. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez lay prone beside her, his M24 rifle system perfectly still, the barrel extending just far enough through their hide to maintain a clear line of sight. Rodriguez was a veteran with 6 tours under his belt, a man who could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 meters. Everyone knew his reputation. Sarah was just the spotter, the support element, the one who called wind speed and target distance while Rodriguez took the shots that mattered. Target reference point Alpha, Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible even though they were alone on the hillside. 200 meters past the blue door, small compound with the damaged wall. Sarah adjusted her scope, finding the location Rodriguez had identified during their pre-mission briefing. Visual confirmed, she replied, her voice equally quiet. The spotting scope brought the distant buildings into sharp focus, every detail clear despite the range. A dog wandered between the houses, and an elderly man emerged from a doorway to shake out a rug. Normal village life, but their intelligence suggested otherwise. The radio crackled softly in Sarah's ear. Overwatch, this is Convoy Alpha. 5 minutes out from Checkpoint Bravo. Request status update on route security. Sarah keyed her radio. Convoy Alpha, Overwatch. Route appears clear. Maintaining observation. No movement detected in target areas. She had been doing this job for 8 months now, ever since completing the Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. The school had been grueling, with a 90% failure rate, but Sarah had excelled at the academic portions. Ballistics calculations, wind reading, target identification, radio procedures, all the technical skills that made a sniper team effective. Rodriguez had initially been skeptical about working with a female spotter, but her performance during training exercises had earned his grudging respect. The convoy appeared on the highway below, 4 up-armored Humvees moving at tactical speed. Sarah tracked their progress through her scope while Rodriguez maintained overwatch on the village. The vehicles looked tiny from their elevated position, like toys moving along a ribbon of asphalt. Everything seemed routine until Rodriguez tensed beside her. Movement, he whispered. Compound Delta, 2 males, military age, one carrying what looks like an RPG. Sarah shifted her scope to the location. 2 men had emerged from a building near the village's eastern edge, moving with purpose toward a position that would give them a clear shot at the convoy. One definitely carried an RPG launcher, while the second man hauled a canvas bag that likely contained additional rockets. Distance? Rodriguez asked. Sarah made the calculation quickly, factoring in the angle and elevation. 740 meters. Wind is variable, mostly calm with occasional gusts from the northwest at maybe 5 miles per hour. Rodriguez made minute adjustments to his rifle position. The M24 scope was already zeroed for this range, but environmental factors always required fine-tuning. Sarah watched the 2 Taliban fighters through her spotting scope as they reached their firing position. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this before, quickly setting up behind a low stone wall that would provide both concealment and a stable firing platform. Convoy Alpha, this is Overwatch, Sarah transmitted. You have 2 military-age males with RPG in prepared position. Grid coordinates follow. The convoy commander's voice came back immediately, tense but controlled. Roger, Overwatch. Can you engage? Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who was already settling behind his rifle. Rules of engagement were clear. They could engage hostile forces preparing to attack friendly units. The Taliban fighters below were definitely hostile, and their intent was obvious. Rodriguez had taken dozens of similar shots during his previous tours. This should be routine. But as Sarah watched through her spotting scope, something bothered her. The men below moved differently than other Taliban fighters she had observed. Their positioning was too obvious, too exposed. Professional fighters wouldn't set up in such a visible location unless they wanted to be seen. Unless they were bait. Wait, she whispered to Rodriguez. Something's wrong with this picture. Rodriguez paused, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. What are you seeing? Sarah scanned the village systematically, section by section, looking for what her instincts told her was there. The two men with the RPG were too perfect, too obvious. Real Taliban fighters would use the buildings for concealment, would coordinate their attack from multiple positions. These two were sitting ducks, and experienced fighters would never expose themselves so carelessly unless... There, a glint of metal from a rooftop, 4 buildings north of the obvious RPG team. Sarah focused her scope on the location and felt her stomach drop. A sniper's rifle barrel, barely visible in the shadows of a damaged wall. The shooter was positioned to target the exact spot where Rodriguez would logically set up to engage the RPG team. Counter-sniper, she breathed. Rooftop, building with the red door, approximately 600 meters. They're using the RPG team as bait. Rodriguez immediately shifted his rifle toward the new target, but the enemy sniper was well concealed. Only the faintest outline was visible, and that only because Sarah knew exactly where to look. The Taliban fighter had chosen his position perfectly, with multiple escape routes and excellent concealment. Taking the shot would require perfect timing and absolute precision. I can't get a clear sight picture, Rodriguez admitted. Too much cover. The convoy was now less than a minute from the kill zone. The RPG team below was making final preparations, while the counter-sniper waited for Rodriguez to reveal his position by taking a shot. It was a perfect tactical trap, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that they were running out of time. Sarah studied the enemy sniper's position through her scope, noting the angles and sight lines. The Taliban fighter had made one small mistake. His position offered excellent concealment from the obvious overwatch positions, but there was a narrow window of vulnerability from their current location. The shot would be extremely difficult, requiring compensation for wind, elevation, and the target's partial concealment. It was the kind of shot that Rodriguez could make, but only if he could see the target clearly. I can talk you onto him, Sarah said, but the window is maybe 2 seconds when he moves to acquire the convoy. Rodriguez shook his head. Range is too far for a snapshot on a partially concealed target. Miss probability is too high. The convoy was now entering the danger area. Sarah could see the lead vehicle approaching the point where the RPG team would have their best shot. The Taliban fighters below were raising their weapon, preparing to fire. In moments, the enemy sniper would reveal himself to take a shot at Rodriguez. Without conscious thought, Sarah found herself reaching for Rodriguez's backup weapon, an M4 carbine with an advanced combat optical gun sight. The rifle was configured for close-range engagements, not precision shooting at extended distances. The maximum effective range for point targets was maybe 500 meters under ideal conditions. She would be attempting a shot at 600 meters with a weapon system not designed for precision work. "What are you doing?" Rodriguez asked, but Sarah was already settling behind the M4. She had trained extensively with the carbine during sniper school, though always as a secondary weapon system. The fundamentals were the same: breathing control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze. But the ballistics were completely different. The 5.56 millimeters rounds fired by the M4 were lighter and more affected by wind than the 7.62 millimeters rounds used in Rodriguez's sniper rifle. At 600 meters, bullet drop would be significant, and the smaller projectile would be pushed dramatically off course by even minor wind variations. Sarah made rapid calculations in her head while adjusting the rifle's position. The enemy sniper's partial concealment meant she would need to time her shot perfectly, waiting for the moment when he shifted position to acquire his target. She would have maybe a 2-second window when enough of his torso would be exposed to present a viable target. "Sarah, that's not your job," Rodriguez said urgently. "You're the spotter. Let me try to reposition for a better angle." But there was no time for repositioning. The convoy was now directly in the kill zone, and the RPG team was taking aim. Sarah could see through her rifle scope that the enemy sniper was beginning to move, settling behind his weapon to engage Rodriguez. In seconds, he would fire, and then Rodriguez would be dead. Sarah controlled her breathing, letting her natural respiratory pause coincide with the moment of truth. The enemy sniper was shifting position, moving from complete concealment to a firing stance. A small portion of his upper torso became visible as he aligned his rifle with Rodriguez's suspected position. The M4's trigger had a crisp break at exactly 4 pounds of pressure. Sarah had fired thousands of practice rounds until the trigger squeeze became automatic, unconscious. Wind was calm at the moment, maybe 2 miles per hour from the northwest. Bullet drop at this range would be approximately 36 inches, requiring her to aim high and lead the target slightly to compensate for his movement. The enemy sniper's rifle barrel swung toward their hide position. Sarah could actually see the man's eye behind his scope as he searched for Rodriguez. In another instant, he would acquire his target and fire. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The M4 bucked against her shoulder, and the 5.56 millimeters round crossed 600 meters of Afghan mountainside in just over half a second. Through her scope, Sarah watched the enemy sniper jerk backward, his rifle clattering onto the rooftop as he collapsed out of sight. The shot had taken him center mass, exactly where she had aimed. Rodriguez was staring at her in amazement. "Holy shit, Sarah. How did you even see him?" But there was no time for explanations. The RPG team below was still preparing to engage the convoy, and without their Overwatch sniper to protect them, they had become vulnerable targets. Rodriguez quickly swung his rifle back toward the original threat, acquiring the RPG team in his scope. "Range 740, wind calm," Sarah reported automatically, falling back in her spotter role as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Rodriguez fired twice in quick succession, both rounds finding their targets. The Taliban fighters collapsed behind their stone wall, the unfired RPG launcher falling harmlessly to the ground. The convoy rolled through the danger area unharmed, completely unaware of how close they had come to disaster. "Convoy Alpha, this is Overwatch," Sarah transmitted. "Threat neutralized. Route is clear." The convoy commander's voice came back, filled with relief. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. Thanks for keeping us safe out there." Sarah began packing up the spotting scope while Rodriguez secured his rifle. Neither of them spoke about what had just happened. Standard operating procedure called for detailed after-action reports, but how could she explain what she had done? How could she describe the instinctive recognition of the tactical trap, or the split-second decision to engage a target at extreme range with an inappropriate weapon system? As they prepared to move to their extraction point, Rodriguez finally broke the silence. "That counter-sniper, he never would have seen you coming. Different angle, different weapon signature. You saved my life up there." Sarah nodded, but didn't reply. She was still processing what had happened, still trying to understand how she had made such an impossible shot under such extreme pressure. The textbook said that spotters provided information and support while snipers took the difficult shots. But textbooks didn't account for every situation, and sometimes the support element had to become something more. The extraction helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, a Black Hawk that settled onto a clearing 200 meters from their position. As they jogged toward the aircraft with their equipment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed during those few seconds on the hillside. She had crossed some invisible line between observer and participant, between support and action. Rodriguez helped her load the equipment into the helicopter's cargo bay. "You know they're going to want a full debrief when we get back," he said over the rotor noise. Sarah nodded, settling into the canvas seat as the Black Hawk lifted off. Through the open door, she could see the village of Karabad falling away below them, already looking peaceful again. The bodies of the Taliban fighters would be collected by their allies, the damaged buildings would be repaired, and life would continue as if nothing had happened. But something had happened something that would be recorded in after-action reports and forwarded up the chain of command. As the helicopter banked toward the forward operating base, Sarah wondered what those reports would say. Would they focus on Rodriguez's successful engagement of the RPG team, or would someone ask harder questions about how a counter-sniper position had been identified and neutralized? Would anyone notice that the ballistics evidence didn't match Rodriguez's rifle? The mountains of Afghanistan spread out below them, brown and harsh in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down there, other coalition forces were conducting other missions, facing other threats. Some of them would have sniper teams providing overwatch, teams where the spotter played the traditional support role while the designated marksman took all the important shots. But Sarah knew now that sometimes the support element had to step forward, had to become more than just an observer calling wind speed and target distance. Sometimes the person with the spotting scope had to pick up a rifle and take the shot that mattered most. The Blackhawks' engines changed pitch as they approached the landing zone at the forward operating base. Sarah could see the familiar collection of hardened structures and defensive positions that had been her home for the past 8 months. In a few hours, she would be sitting in a debriefing room, answering questions about what had happened on the hillside near Karabad. Rodriguez was cleaning his rifle, breaking down the M24 with the practiced efficiency of a veteran sniper. He looked up at Sarah and nodded toward the village, now just a speck in the distance. "That was some shooting back there," he said. "Reminded me why I always request you as my spotter." Sarah smiled but didn't reply. She was thinking about the enemy sniper, wondering who he had been and how he had learned his craft. Professional military training, or just years of experience fighting in these mountains? Had he been confident in his tactical setup, certain that he could eliminate the coalition Overwatch team and allow the RPG attack to succeed? The helicopter touched down with a slight bump, and the crew chief signaled for them to unload their equipment. Sarah grabbed her gear and followed Rodriguez toward the debriefing facility, knowing that in a few hours she would be back at her bunk, trying to process everything that had happened. But she also knew that something had changed permanently during those few seconds on the Afghan hillside. She had proven something to herself, something that went beyond Army training manuals and traditional role definitions. When the situation demanded it, when lives hung in the balance, she could step forward and take the shot that counted. The question now was whether anyone else would recognize what had really happened up there and what it might mean for her future in the Army. Sarah Chun had always been content with the support role, comfortable being the person who provided critical information while someone else pulled the trigger. Now she wondered if that would be enough anymore. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman was nothing special, just another plywood box with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that had seen better days. Sarah sat across from Captain Martinez, the battalion intelligence officer, while Rodriguez occupied the chair next to her. The captain's laptop screen displayed a detailed map of the Karabad area, with red markers indicating the positions of the neutralized Taliban fighters. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Captain Martinez said, referring to his notes. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you identified 2 hostile targets with an RPG at approximately 0847 hours. You then engaged and eliminated both targets with your M24 system at a range of 740 meters. Rodriguez nodded. "That's correct, sir. Clean shots, both targets down." Sarah noticed that Rodriguez hadn't mentioned the counter-sniper at all. The official report described a straightforward engagement. Sniper team identifies threat. Sniper eliminates threat. Convoy proceeds safely. No complications. No unusual circumstances. She wondered if Rodriguez was protecting her, or if he simply didn't want to deal with the administrative headache that would follow if the truth came out. Captain Martinez turned to Sarah. "Specialist Chun, your role was to provide target identification and ballistic information for Sergeant Rodriguez. Anything to add to his account?" Sarah hesitated. The truthful answer would open up a complex investigation. Ballistics experts would examine the enemy sniper's body and determine that he had been killed by 5.56 millimeters ammunition, not the 7.62 millimeters rounds fired by Rodriguez's rifle. Questions would be asked about who else had been firing and why. Her unconventional engagement would be scrutinized by people who had never been in a tactical situation, people who would judge her actions based on regulations and procedures rather than battlefield necessity. The engagement occurred as Sergeant Rodriguez described, Sarah said finally. I provided target information and supported his shots. Captain Martinez made a few more notes and closed his laptop. Good work out there, both of you. That convoy was carrying medical supplies for the civilian clinic in Jalalabad. You save a lot of lives today. After the captain dismissed them, Sarah and Rodriguez walked across the base toward the dining facility. The late afternoon heat made everything shimmer, and the constant background noise of generators and air conditioning units created a mechanical symphony that never stopped. Soldiers moved between buildings with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to function in a dangerous environment. You didn't tell him about the counter-sniper, Sarah said when they were out of earshot. Rodriguez shrugged. Didn't seem necessary. Mission accomplished, no friendly casualties. Sometimes the details just complicate things. But Sarah knew it was more than that. Rodriguez was a career soldier who understood how the Army worked. Unusual incidents generated paperwork, investigations, and questions from higher headquarters. A simple sniper engagement where everything went according to doctrine was much easier to explain than a complex tactical situation where roles had been reversed and standard operating procedures had been abandoned. They ate dinner in relative silence, surrounded by the usual dining facility noise of soldiers discussing their missions, their families back home, and their plans for when they rotated back to the United States. Sarah pushed food around her tray, not really tasting anything. Her mind kept returning to that moment on the hillside when she had acquired the enemy sniper in her rifle scope. The clarity of the shot, the certainty that she could make the hit despite the extreme range and less-than-ideal weapon system. After dinner, Sarah returned to her quarters, a small plywood room with 2 bunks, a wall locker, and exactly enough space for 2 people to exist without privacy. Her roommate, Specialist Johnson, was reading a paperback novel and didn't look up when Sarah entered. Sarah pulled out her personal laptop and opened her email. 3 messages from her parents, 2 from friends back home, and 1 from her younger brother who was finishing his senior year of high school. Normal life continuing in a world that had no idea what had happened on an Afghan hillside that morning. She started to compose a message to her brother, then stopped. How could she explain what she was experiencing? How could she describe the weight of responsibility that came with taking another person's life, even when that person had been attempting to kill American soldiers? Her brother was worried about college applications and basketball tryouts. The gap between their realities seemed impossible to bridge. Rodriguez appeared in her doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee from the dining facility. Mind if I come in? Johnson looked up from her book, recognized Rodriguez, and suddenly decided she needed to do laundry. She grabbed her gear and disappeared, leaving them alone. You've been quiet since the debrief, Rodriguez said, settling into Johnson's vacant chair. Want to talk about it? Sarah accepted the coffee and took a sip. It was terrible as always, but the caffeine was welcome. I keep thinking about that shot. I mean, with an M4 at that range? The odds against making that hit were astronomical. But you did make it, Rodriguez pointed out. That's what counts. Is it? Sarah asked. Or am I just lucky that everything worked out? What if I had missed? What if the enemy sniper had killed you while I was playing around with your backup rifle? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. You know what I learned during my first tour in Iraq? Sometimes you don't have time to calculate odds or worry about regulations. Sometimes you just have to trust your training and take action. You saw something I missed, you recognized a threat, and you neutralized it. That's what soldiers do. But I'm not a sniper, Sarah protested. I'm a spotter. My job is to support you, not to take shots on my own. Your job is to keep American soldiers alive, Rodriguez corrected. Everything else is just details. Sarah stared into her coffee, thinking about his words. She had joined the Army to serve her country, to be part of something larger than herself. The sniper program had appealed to her, because of its precision, its emphasis on intelligence, and careful planning. She had never expected to find herself in a situation where split-second decisions and individual initiative mattered more than following established procedures. "The thing is," she said slowly, "I think I could do it again. Make shots like that, I mean. Not just support role stuff, but actual precision shooting under combat conditions." Rodriguez nodded. "I know you could. I've been watching you for 8 months, Sarah. You've got the skills and the temperament for this work. Better than most people who come through sniper school, actually. Then why am I still just a spotter?" "Because that's how the system works," Rodriguez said. "Spotters provide support, snipers take shots. Doesn't matter what you're capable of, that's just how roles are defined." "But what if the roles are wrong?" Sarah asked. "What if the system doesn't account for people who could do more than their assigned function?" Rodriguez smiled. "Then maybe it's time to change the system." 3 days later, Sarah found herself standing outside the office of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the battalion commander. She had requested the meeting through proper channels, submitting a formal written request to discuss her career development. The colonel's clerk had scheduled 15 minutes, which would be barely enough time to explain what she wanted to discuss. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was a compact man in his 40s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had spent most of his adult life in the Army. His office walls displayed the usual collection of military certificates, unit photographs, and commendation letters. Behind his desk, an American flag hung next to the battalion colors. "Specialist Chun," the colonel said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Your request mentioned career development. How can I help you?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, trying to find the right words to explain her situation without revealing details about the Karabat engagement that might complicate things. "Sir, I've been working as a sniper team spotter for 8 months. I believe I have the skills and experience to advance to designated marksman training." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison consulted his computer screen, presumably reviewing Sarah's personnel file. "Your performance evaluations are excellent. Sergeant Rodriguez speaks very highly of your work, but designated marksman positions are currently filled throughout the battalion. Are you unhappy with your current assignment?" "No, sir," Sarah said quickly. "I enjoy working with Sergeant Rodriguez, but I think I could contribute more to mission success if I had additional training and responsibilities." The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "The Army has specific career progression paths for different specialties. Spotters who demonstrate exceptional performance can advance to team leader positions or move into instruction roles at the sniper school. Are those options of interest to you?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I'm more interested in direct mission contribution, actually engaging targets and neutralizing threats. That's what Sergeant Rodriguez is for," the colonel pointed out. "The sniper team concept works because each member has a specific role. Spotters provide information and support. Snipers take the shots. It's been proven effective in thousands of combat engagements. But what if circumstances require role flexibility?" Sarah asked. "What if the traditional division of responsibilities isn't adequate for a particular tactical situation?" Lieutenant Colonel Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Is there something specific you want to tell me, Specialist Chun?" Sarah realized she was approaching dangerous ground. The colonel was experienced enough to recognize that her questions weren't entirely theoretical. If she pushed too hard, he might start asking specific questions about recent missions, and that could lead to complications for both her and Rodriguez. "No, sir," she said. "I'm just thinking about ways to maximize my contribution to unit effectiveness." The colonel nodded slowly. "I appreciate your initiative, Specialist Chun, but the Army has specific reasons for maintaining role clarity within specialized teams. Discipline and adherence to established procedures are what keeps soldiers alive in combat situations." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, recognizing that the conversation was effectively over. However, the colonel continued, "I will make a note in your file about your interest in additional training. When opportunities become available, we'll consider your request." Sarah stood and saluted. "Thank you, sir." As she left the colonel's office, Sarah felt frustrated, but not entirely surprised. The Army was a large organization that functioned according to established systems and procedures. Individual initiative was valued, but only within clearly defined boundaries. People who wanted to operate outside their assigned roles were viewed with suspicion, especially if they couldn't provide specific justification for their requests. That evening, Sarah found herself on the base's small recreation area, a patch of gravel with some exercise equipment and a basketball hoop. She was shooting baskets in the fading light when Rodriguez appeared with a basketball under his arm. "Heard you talk to the colonel today," he said, dribbling the ball casually. "How'd that go?" "About as expected," Sarah replied. "The system works fine the way it is, and individual soldiers should be satisfied with their assigned roles." Rodriguez nodded. "That's pretty much what I figured he'd say. But you know what? Sometimes the right people notice things, even when they don't say anything at the time." "What do you mean?" "I mean that battalion commanders talk to other battalion commanders, and sometimes stories get passed around about soldiers who show unusual initiative or capability, especially when those soldiers perform under extreme pressure." Sarah caught the basketball he tossed to her. "You think Colonel Harrison might mention my request to someone else?" "I think word gets around about good soldiers," Rodriguez said. "And sometimes opportunities present themselves in unexpected ways." They played one-on-one for 20 minutes, neither keeping score, just enjoying the physical activity after a day spent in briefing rooms and administrative offices. As they walked back toward their quarters, Rodriguez brought up something that had been on Sarah's mind since the Karabad mission. "You know what really happened up there, don't you?" he said. "When you took that shot." Sarah nodded. "I stopped being a spotter and became something else." "You became what the situation required," Rodriguez corrected. "That's what good soldiers do. They adapt to circumstances and find ways to accomplish the mission." "But the Army doesn't want soldiers who adapt," Sarah pointed out. "The Army wants soldiers who follow procedures and stick to their assigned roles." "The Army wants soldiers who win," Rodriguez said. "Everything else is just bureaucracy." 2 weeks later, Sarah was cleaning equipment in the team room when Sergeant First Class Williams, the senior enlisted soldier in their unit, appeared in the doorway. "Chun, Colonel Harrison wants to see you. Right now." Sarah felt a moment of panic, wondering if something about the Karabad engagement had finally come to light. Had someone analyzed the ballistics evidence and started asking questions? Had the enemy sniper's body revealed information that contradicted the official after-action report? She found Lieutenant Colonel Harrison in his office along with someone she didn't recognize, a major wearing dress uniform with a different unit patch. The stranger was tall and lean, with the alert eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Specialist Chun," the colonel said, "I'd like you to meet Major Stevens from Special Operations Command. He has some questions for you." Major Stevens gestured for Sarah to take a seat. "Specialist Chun, I've been reviewing your service record and performance evaluations. Very impressive. Sergeant Rodriguez has provided some interesting insights into your capabilities." Sarah glanced at Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who maintained a neutral expression. "Thank you, sir. I'm here because Special Operations Command is developing a new program," Major Stevens continued. "We're looking for soldiers with specific skill sets and the ability to operate effectively under extreme pressure. Soldiers who can think independently and adapt to changing tactical situations." "I see, sir," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. Major Stevens opened a folder and consulted some documents. "Tell me about the engagement near Karabad 2 weeks ago." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, a detailed investigation into what had really happened on that hillside. She looked at Lieutenant Colonel Harrison again, but his expression gave nothing away. "Sir, the after-action report covers all the relevant details," Sarah said carefully. "I've read the after-action report," Major Stevens replied, "but I'm more interested in your perspective on what happened. Specifically, your assessment of the tactical situation and how it developed." Sarah realized she was at a decision point. She could continue deflecting questions and hope that Major Stevens would drop the subject, or she could tell the truth and deal with whatever consequences followed. The Major's steady gaze suggested that evasion wouldn't be effective much longer. "Sir, the situation was more complex than the official report indicates," Sarah said finally. Major Stevens smiled. "I thought might be. Why don't you tell me what really happened?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah provided a detailed account of the counter-sniper engagement, from her initial recognition of the tactical trap to her decision to engage with the M4 carbine. Major Stevens listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but never expressing surprise or disapproval. When she finished, Major Stevens closed his folder and looked at Lieutenant Colonel Harrison. "Colonel, I think we found what we're looking for." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison nodded. "I had a feeling you might." Major Stevens turned back to Sarah. "Specialist Chun, how would you feel about a change of assignment? Something that would make full use of your capabilities?" Sarah looked between the two officers, trying to understand what was being offered. "Sir, could you be more specific about what kind of assignment?" "The kind where role flexibility isn't just encouraged, it's essential," Major Stevens said. "The kind where individual initiative and tactical adaptability are more important than following standard operating procedures." "Special operations?" Sarah asked. "A special program within special operations," Major Stevens confirmed. "Very selective, very demanding. Not everyone who applies is accepted, and not everyone who is accepted completes the training." Sarah thought about her conversation with Rodriguez, about his prediction that the right people would notice her capabilities. She thought about her frustration with rigid role definitions and her desire to contribute more directly to mission success. "Sir, when would this assignment begin?" "If you're interested, and if you pass the initial screening, you could report to the training site within 30 days, Major Stevens said. Sarah looked at Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. "This is an exceptional opportunity, Specialist Chun. I strongly recommend you consider it." "Sir, I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. As she left the colonel's office, Sarah felt like her entire world had shifted. For months, she had been frustrated with the limitations of her assigned role, wondering if she would ever have the chance to fully utilize her capabilities. Now suddenly, that chance had materialized in a way she never could have anticipated. She found Rodriguez in the team room, maintenance manual open on the table in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and his expression told her he already knew what had happened. "So," he said, "how did your meeting go?" "I think you already know," Sarah replied. "This is really happening, isn't it? I'm actually going to get the chance to do more than just spot targets and call wind speed. You're going to get the chance to be exactly what the situation requires," Rodriguez said, "which is what you've always been, even when the official role description didn't recognize it." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about everything that had changed since that morning on the Afghan hillside. In a few weeks, she would leave Forward Operating Base Chapman and report to a training facility whose location Major Stevens hadn't revealed. She would begin a program whose details remained classified, working with people whose capabilities and background she could only guess at. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. When General Harrison had asked, "Who made that hit?" the question had started a chain of events that would completely transform her military career. The support role that had once defined her limitations had become the foundation for something much larger and more challenging. Sarah Chun had always been content to provide backup, while others took the important shots. Now she was going to discover what she could accomplish when the restrictions were removed and her full capabilities were unleashed. The training facility was hidden in the mountains of North Carolina, accessible only by a winding dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. Sarah had been traveling for 18 hours, first by military transport from Afghanistan to Germany, then by commercial flight to Atlanta, and finally by government sedan that picked her up at the airport with no explanation beyond a driver who verified her identity and handed her a manila envelope containing basic instructions. The facility looked like an abandoned summer camp from the outside. Rustic wooden buildings scattered among tall pine trees, with no visible security or military markings. Only when Sarah approached the main building did she notice the subtle indicators that suggested this place was something more than it appeared. Motion sensors concealed among the trees, reinforced doors that looked ordinary, but were clearly built to withstand serious assault, and windows that reflected light in a way that suggested bulletproof glass. A civilian woman in her 30s met Sarah at the entrance. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, looking more like a park ranger than military personnel, but her bearing and the way she evaluated Sarah suggested extensive training and experience. Specialist Chun, the woman said, extending her hand. We refer to it simply as advanced individual training, but it's unlike anything offered elsewhere in the military. The goal is to develop soldiers who can operate independently in complex environments, adapting to changing situations, and accomplishing missions that would normally require entire teams. They stopped outside a dormitory room that looked comfortable but Spartan. Single bed, desk, wall locker, and a small bathroom. Sarah's duffel bag was already waiting on the bed, having been transported from Afghanistan through channels she hadn't been informed about. You'll be here for 12 weeks, Martinez continued. The training is physically and mentally demanding. Some candidates don't complete the program. Those who do leave here with capabilities that most soldiers never develop. How many others are in my class? Sarah asked. You'll meet them at dinner tonight. 7 candidates total, all selected for specific reasons. All with experience that suggests they can handle advanced individual responsibilities. Martinez left her to settle in, promising to return in 2 hours for the initial briefing. Sarah unpacked her gear, noting that some items had been removed from her duffel bag while others had been added. Her personal rifle cleaning kit was gone, replaced by unfamiliar tools and equipment. Her standard-issue field manual collection had been supplemented with texts on urban warfare, explosive ordnance disposal, and advanced first aid. The window in her room looked out over a valley where she could see what appeared to be a small town, complete streets, buildings, and even traffic signals. But something about the scene looked artificial, like a movie set designed to resemble real life without actually being inhabited. At 1800 hours, Sarah made her way to the dining facility following directions Martinez had provided. The building was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a kitchen that could clearly support many more people than the current training class. She found 6 others seated around a large table, all wearing civilian clothes and all studying each other with the careful attention of professional soldiers meeting potential teammates. Martinez appeared and made brief introductions without providing much background information about any of the candidates. Sarah learned names and general specialties. Mark was an Army Ranger. Jennifer had been a Navy intelligence specialist. Carlos was a Marine Force reconnaissance veteran. Lisa came from Air Force Special Operations. David was a former Green Beret. And Tony had been an Army combat engineer with multiple deployments. You're all here because you've demonstrated exceptional individual capabilities, Martinez said after they had finished eating. But this program isn't about individual performance. It's about learning to operate alone while supporting larger mission objectives. She led them to a briefing room where wall-mounted displays showed satellite imagery, urban maps, and technical diagrams. Tomorrow you begin Phase 1 training, which focuses on advanced marksmanship and fieldcraft. You'll be expected to engage targets at ranges up to 1,200 meters using various weapon systems. You'll learn to operate in environments ranging from urban to wilderness to maritime. Carlos raised his hand. Ma'am, what's the ultimate objective? What kind of missions are we training for? Martinez smiled. Missions that conventional military units can't handle. Situations that require someone who can think independently, adapt quickly, and accomplish objectives without direct support or supervision. Over the following weeks, Sarah discovered that the training lived up to Martinez's description. Days began at 0500 with physical training that pushed every candidate to their limits. The morning run wasn't just about cardiovascular fitness. They ran while carrying heavy packs, navigating obstacle courses, and solving tactical problems that required mental focus despite physical exhaustion. Marksmanship training went far beyond anything Sarah had experienced in sniper school. They learned to engage targets with rifles, pistols, and specialized weapons she had never seen before. The ranges included not just traditional shooting positions, but scenarios requiring shots from moving vehicles from unstable platforms and under severe time pressure. Sarah discovered that her natural shooting ability, which had seemed exceptional during her deployment, was merely the foundation for much more advanced skills. The training facility's mock town proved to be an elaborate urban warfare simulator. The buildings contained sophisticated sensor systems that could detect movement, weapon signatures, and even heart rate elevations. Candidates were required to navigate through the town while avoiding detection, gathering intelligence, and accomplishing specific objectives. The scenarios changed daily, sometimes hourly, requiring constant adaptation and improvisation. Real operations don't follow textbook procedures, explained Lieutenant Morrison, one of the instructors who appeared to have extensive special operations experience. You need to be comfortable making decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. Sarah excelled at the technical aspects of training, weapons manipulation, communications procedures, and tactical planning. But she struggled with some of the interpersonal challenges. Several scenarios required candidates to interact with role players portraying foreign nationals, gathering information through conversation rather than surveillance. Sarah's natural introversion made these exercises particularly difficult. Jennifer, the former Navy intelligence specialist, took Sarah aside after a particularly frustrating training session where Sarah had failed to extract critical information from a role player portraying an uncooperative local official. "You're thinking like a sniper," Jennifer said. "Observing from a distance, staying hidden, avoiding contact. But sometimes the mission requires you to engage directly with people to build rapport and trust quickly." "I'm better with technical problems than people problems," Sarah admitted. "Everyone has strengths and weaknesses," Jennifer replied. "But this program is about developing capabilities you didn't know you had. The instructors wouldn't have selected you if they didn't think you could handle every aspect of the training." Week 6 brought the first major elimination. David, the former Green Beret, was dismissed from the program after failing to complete a navigation exercise within the required time limit. The instructors provided no detailed explanation, simply informing the remaining candidates that David would be reassigned to conventional duties. "This isn't about punishment," Martinez explained during the next morning's briefing. "David is an exceptional soldier who will contribute significantly to any conventional unit. But this program requires a very specific set of capabilities, and not everyone can develop them to the required level." The remaining candidates, Sarah, Mark, Jennifer, Carlos, Lisa, and Tony, continued training with increased intensity. They learned advanced reconnaissance techniques, including electronic surveillance and counter-surveillance measures. They practiced infiltration and exfiltration methods that Sarah had only read about in classified intelligence reports. Most importantly, they learned to operate completely alone for extended periods, making all tactical decisions without outside guidance. Week 8 included Sarah's most challenging exercise yet. She was inserted into a remote wilderness area with basic equipment and instructions to reach a specific location 40 miles away within 72 hours. The route required her to avoid multiple security checkpoints staffed by role players, gather intelligence from designated sources, and accomplish several mission objectives along the way. The first day went smoothly. Sarah used terrain and weather to avoid detection, reaching her first checkpoint ahead of schedule. But the second day brought unexpected complications when she discovered that one of her required routes had been compromised by additional security that wasn't mentioned in her briefing. Standard procedure would have been to abort the mission or request new instructions. But the training scenario included no communication capability, and Sarah realized she was expected to adapt and improvise. She spent 6 hours conducting reconnaissance of the compromised route, identifying patterns in the security coverage that would allow her to proceed. The infiltration required her to move through a defended area during daylight hours, using concealment techniques that left no margin for error. Sarah found herself crawling through drainage ditches and abandoned buildings, timing her movements to coincide with guard rotations she had observed from a distance. The physical demands were exhausting, but the mental pressure was even more challenging. One mistake would compromise the entire exercise. She reached the final objective with 4 hours to spare, having successfully avoided detection and accomplished all mission requirements. But, more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could operate effectively in complex, unpredictable situations without direct supervision or support. Outstanding performance, Lieutenant Morrison told her during the post-exercise debrief. You adapted to changing circumstances and found solutions that weren't covered in your initial briefing. That's exactly what we're looking for. Week 10 brought another elimination. Lisa, the Air Force Special Operations veteran, was dismissed after struggling with the close-quarters combat training. Like David, she was clearly a capable soldier, but her skills didn't align perfectly with the program's requirements. The remaining 5 candidates had developed into a cohesive team despite the individual nature of most training exercises. They studied together, shared techniques and insights, and supported each other through the most challenging scenarios. Sarah found herself becoming more comfortable with the interpersonal aspects of operations, while Mark and Carlos benefited from her technical expertise and attention to detail. We're not trying to make you into something you're not, Martinez explained during one of their regular counseling sessions. We're helping you discover capabilities you already possess, but haven't had the opportunity to develop. Week 11 included the final major exercise, a comprehensive scenario that required each candidate to plan and execute a complex mission with multiple phases and contingencies. Sarah was assigned to infiltrate a fortified compound, gather specific intelligence, and extract a high-value target without alerting security forces. The compound was actually a section of the training facility that had been modified to resemble a foreign military installation. Sarah spent 2 days conducting surveillance, identifying guard patterns, security systems, and potential approach routes. The planning phase required her to consider dozens of variables, from weather conditions to backup extraction plans. The actual infiltration took place during a thunderstorm that provided both concealment and additional challenges. Sarah used the weather to mask her approach, but the rain also made movement more difficult and reduced visibility. She reached the target building using a route that required her to bypass multiple security measures, including motion sensors and guard patrols. Inside the building, she located the required intelligence documents and identified the role player representing the high-value target. The extraction required her to guide the prisoner through the same infiltration route in reverse, while maintaining security and avoiding detection by guards who were now actively searching for intruders. They reached the extraction point with minutes to spare, having successfully completed all mission objectives. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything she had experienced during conventional military training. She had planned and executed a complex operation entirely on her own, making tactical decisions under extreme pressure and adapting to unexpected circumstances. Exceptional work, Martinez told her afterward. You've demonstrated everything we hoped to see when we selected you for this program. Week 12 concluded with graduation ceremonies that were unlike anything Sarah had experienced in the conventional military. There were no speeches, no formal presentations, just a brief meeting where Martinez handed each of the 5 remaining candidates a folder containing their new assignment orders. Sarah's orders directed her to report to a nondescript office building in Washington, D.C., where she would receive specific mission assignments from a unit that wasn't identified in any official documentation. The orders were signed by a general whose name Sarah didn't recognize, but whose signature carried obvious authority. Your real training begins now, Martinez said as the candidates prepared to leave the facility. Everything you've learned here is just the foundation. The actual missions you'll undertake will require you to continue developing and adapting. As Sarah packed her gear for the trip to Washington, she reflected on how much had changed since that morning on the Afghan hillside, when she had taken an impossible shot with an inappropriate weapon. The support role that had once defined her military career now seemed like preparation for something much larger and more significant. Mark appeared in her doorway as she finished packing. Any idea what we'll be doing in Washington? Sarah shook her head. But I have a feeling it's going to be interesting. Jennifer joined them, her own gear packed and ready. Whatever it is, I think we're prepared for it. Carlos and Tony appeared, completing the group. They had all survived 12 weeks of the most demanding training any of them had ever experienced. They had been tested physically, mentally, and emotionally, and they had proven themselves capable of operating independently in complex, unpredictable environments. You know what I realized during that final exercise? Carlos said, "We're not soldiers anymore. We're something else entirely." "We're what the situation requires," Sarah replied, remembering Rodriguez's words from months earlier. "And I think the situations we're going to face will require everything we've learned and more." The government sedan arrived to transport them to the airport, where they would catch commercial flights to their respective destinations. Sarah took one last look at the training facility that had transformed her from a conventional soldier into something much more capable and adaptable. In Washington, she would receive her first real mission assignment, an operation that would test everything she had learned during 12 weeks of intensive training. But more importantly, she would finally have the opportunity to discover what she could accomplish when all limitations were removed and her full capabilities were unleashed. Sarah Chun had begun this journey as a frustrated spotter who wanted to contribute more to mission success. She was ending it as a highly trained operative capable of planning and executing complex missions independently. The question now was what kinds of missions would require such specialized capabilities and whether she was truly prepared for what lay ahead. As the sedan drove away from the facility, disappearing into the North Carolina mountains, Sarah felt ready to find out. The office building in downtown Washington looked like thousands of others, glass and steel construction, corporate logos in the lobby, and business people hurrying through the entrance with coffee cups and briefcases. Sarah presented her identification to security and received a visitor's badge that granted access to the 11th floor. No one mentioned military affiliation or government business. She could have been attending a meeting at any consulting firm or technology company. Colonel Patricia Walker's office was equally unremarkable, with standard government furniture and windows that offered a view of other office buildings. Walker herself was a compact woman in her late 40s, wearing civilian clothes and projecting the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions without fanfare. "Specialist Chun," Walker said, gesturing toward a chair. "How was your training experience?" "Challenging but rewarding, ma'am," Sarah replied, noting that Walker had used her enlisted rank despite the civilian environment. "I've reviewed your performance reports from the facility. Outstanding work across all assessment categories. Your instructors were particularly impressed with your adaptability and independent decision-making capabilities." Walker opened a thick folder on her desk, consulting documents that Sarah couldn't see from her position. "Before we discuss your first assignment, I want to make sure you understand what you volunteered for. The missions you'll undertake have strategic importance, but cannot be accomplished through conventional military operations. Success will depend entirely on your individual capabilities and judgment." "I understand, ma'am." "No, you don't," Walker said with a slight smile. "Not yet, but you will." She handed Sarah a sealed envelope marked with security classifications that indicated extremely sensitive material. "Your first mission begins immediately. You'll be operating under civilian cover in Eastern Europe, gathering intelligence on a weapons trafficking network that's been supplying advanced military hardware to terrorist organizations." Sarah opened the envelope and found detailed briefing materials, including photographs, maps, and background information on several individuals identified as key figures in the trafficking network. The complexity of the operation was immediately apparent. This wasn't a simple reconnaissance mission, but a long-term infiltration requiring her to establish a false identity and build relationships with dangerous people. The target is Viktor Petrov, Walker continued, pointing to a photograph of a well-dressed man in his 50s. Former Russian military officer, now operating as an independent arms dealer based in Prague. Intelligence suggests he's acquired several shipments of advanced anti-aircraft missiles that could pose a serious threat to civilian aviation if they reach the wrong hands. Sarah studied Petrov's photograph and the associated intelligence reports. The man appeared to operate legitimate import-export businesses as cover for his illegal activities, maintaining offices in multiple European cities and employing dozens of people who might or might not be aware of his true business. "What's my cover identity?" Sarah asked. Elena Vasquez, freelance journalist specializing in Eastern European economic development. You have complete documentation, including passport, press credentials, and a publication history with several legitimate magazines. The identity has been established over the past 6 months and will stand up to detailed background checks. Walker handed her another folder containing Elena Vasquez's complete background, birth certificate, educational transcripts, employment records, and even apartment lease agreements in 3 different cities. The level of detail was impressive, creating a fictional person who could pass for real under almost any scrutiny. Your mission is to make contact with Petrov's organization, gather intelligence on his weapons inventory and distribution networks, and identify the specific location where the anti-aircraft missiles are being stored. Once you have that information, a separate team will handle interdiction and recovery. Timeline? Sarah asked. Open-ended. This type of infiltration can't be rushed. You'll need to build genuine relationships and earn trust gradually. Could take weeks or months, depending on how quickly you can establish credibility. Sarah had expected her first real mission to be challenging, but the complexity of this assignment exceeded anything she had imagined. During training, she had learned infiltration techniques and cover identity management, but those exercises had lasted days, not months. This mission would require her to maintain a false persona for an extended period while gathering intelligence on people who would kill her if they discovered her true identity. "What kind of support will I have?" she asked. "Minimal," Walker replied. "You'll have emergency communication procedures and extraction protocols, but day-to-day operations will be entirely independent. The success of this mission depends on your ability to operate alone without outside guidance." 2 days later, Sarah found herself on a commercial flight to Vienna, traveling under the name Elena Vasquez with a passport that showed entry and exit stamps from multiple European countries. Her luggage contained the belongings of a freelance journalist, camera equipment, recording devices, notebooks filled with interview notes, and business cards from various publications. She had spent the previous 2 days studying Elena's background until the fictional identity felt natural. Elena was 28 years old, born in Phoenix to Mexican immigrant parents, educated at Arizona State University with a degree in journalism. She had spent the past 5 years building a career covering economic development stories in emerging markets, with particular expertise in post-Soviet Eastern Europe. The character was close enough to Sarah's actual background to be believable, while different enough to provide operational security. Elena was more outgoing than Sarah, more willing to approach strangers and ask probing questions. She was also more casual about personal relationships, comfortable using friendship and attraction as tools to gather information. Vienna's airport was busy with international travelers, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of operating in a foreign environment where cultural differences and language barriers created both opportunities and risks. Elena spoke fluent Spanish and serviceable German, along with basic conversational skills in Russian and Czech. Sarah had spent the past month improving those language capabilities, knowing that authentic communication would be essential for mission success. Her first objective was to establish Elena's presence in the journalism community, building relationships with local reporters and editors who could provide both credibility and information. Sarah checked into a modest hotel near the city center and spent her first week attending press conferences, conducting interviews with minor officials, and writing articles that would be published under Elena's byline. The journalism work was actually enjoyable, requiring Sarah to exercise research and communication skills that she had developed during her military intelligence training. She discovered that Elena's cover identity provided excellent access to information, since journalists were expected to ask detailed questions about sensitive topics. After 2 weeks in Vienna, Sarah felt confident enough in Elena's established presence to begin making inquiries about Viktor Petrov. She approached the research carefully, focusing initially on his legitimate business activities rather than any illegal operations. Petrov's import-export company had offices in Vienna, and Elena's economic development expertise provided a logical reason to be interested in his business practices. Sarah's first breakthrough came during a conversation with Anton Richter, a local business reporter who had covered Petrov's companies for several years. They met at a coffee shop near the university, ostensibly to discuss a story Elena was writing about successful immigrant entrepreneurs in Austria. "Petrov is interesting," Richter said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Very successful businessman, but also very private. Doesn't give interviews, doesn't attend public events. Makes it difficult to write about him." "What kind of business exactly?" Sarah asked, playing the role of a journalist seeking background information. "Officially? Import-export, specializing in industrial equipment and raw materials from former Soviet republics. But there are always rumors about other activities. Nothing anyone can prove, but the kind of stories that make people cautious about asking too many questions." Sarah filed that information away while continuing to build Elena's local network. She attended cultural events, joined a hiking club, and even began dating a graduate student from the university. The personal relationships were part of her cover, but they also provided emotional grounding that helped her maintain the Elena persona for extended periods. 3 weeks into the mission, Sarah received her first real lead when Maria Santos, a Spanish journalist working for an international news service, mentioned that she had been trying to arrange an interview with Petrov for months without success. "He's supposed to be involved in some kind of charitable foundation that provides medical supplies to refugee camps," Maria explained during a dinner conversation. "But every time I contact his office, they say he's traveling or unavailable. Very frustrating." Sarah filed a story about refugee aid organizations the next day, using Elena's press credentials to request an interview with Petrov's charitable foundation. The response came within 48 hours. A polite declination citing Mr. Petrov's busy travel schedule, but including an invitation to attend a foundation fundraising event the following week. The fundraising event was held at an upscale hotel in Prague, requiring Sarah to travel to Czech Republic using Elena's established European press credentials. She arrived a day early to conduct reconnaissance and establish her presence in the local journalism community. The event itself was elegant and well-attended, featuring diplomatic personnel, business leaders, and charity officials from throughout Eastern Europe. Sarah wore a conservative business suit and carried a digital recorder, maintaining Elena's professional appearance while observing everything carefully. Viktor Petrov proved to be a charming host, moving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public events. He was tall and distinguished, with graying hair and expensive clothing that suggested significant wealth. When he spoke with guests, he projected genuine interest in their conversations, though Sarah noticed that his responses to substantive questions were always general and non-committal. Sarah approached him during a quiet moment, introducing herself as Elena Vasquez and explaining her interest in writing about successful charitable organizations in post-Soviet Europe. Petrov was courteous but cautious, agreeing to a brief conversation while avoiding any specific commitments. "My foundation tries to address urgent humanitarian needs," he said, speaking fluent English with only a slight accent. "Medical supplies, educational materials, basic infrastructure support. There are many communities that need assistance." "Do you work directly with refugee camps?" Sarah asked, following up on Maria Santos's information. "Sometimes," Petrov replied, "though we prefer to work through established aid organizations when possible. More efficient that way." The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but Sarah gathered several important observations. Petrov was intelligent and careful, providing information that sounded substantive while actually revealing very little. His answers suggested familiarity with legitimate humanitarian work, but also indicated that his foundation's activities might provide cover for other operations. More importantly, she noticed that Petrov was accompanied by two men who maintained careful observation of everyone he spoke with. The men were dressed as business associates, but their alertness and positioning suggested security training, professional protection that went beyond what most legitimate businessmen would require. After the event, Sarah followed standard intelligence gathering procedures, documenting her observations and analyzing the information she had collected. Petrov's charitable foundation provided plausible cover for transportation and logistics operations that could easily be adapted for weapons trafficking. The security presence suggested that he was concerned about potential threats, possibly including law enforcement surveillance. Over the following weeks, Sarah expanded her investigation while maintaining Elena's journalism activities. She interviewed officials from several aid organizations, gathering information about humanitarian supply chains and distribution networks. The research provided both credibility for Elena's cover and useful intelligence about how weapons could be moved through the region using legitimate transportation systems. Her breakthrough came during a conversation with Dr. Pavel Novak, a Czech physician who had worked in refugee camps throughout the Balkans. During their interview, conducted at his clinic in Prague, Dr. Novak mentioned receiving medical supplies from Petrov's foundation on several occasions. Very high-quality equipment, Dr. Novak said. Much better than what we usually see from charitable donations. Almost like military medical supplies, you know? Very sophisticated, very expensive. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Military medical supplies could indicate access to military supply chains, which might include weapons and ammunition. Do you know where the foundation sources their medical equipment? I asked once, Dr. Novak replied. They said it came from surplus military stocks being donated by various governments. Made sense to me. Armies have excellent medical equipment, and when they update their inventory, the old equipment has to go somewhere. That evening, Sarah sent her first detailed intelligence report using encrypted communication procedures she had learned during training. The information about military surplus supplies provided a potential link between Petrov's legitimate foundation work and his alleged weapons trafficking activities. If he had access to military surplus channels for medical equipment, he likely had access to weapons and ammunition from the same sources. Colonel Walker's response came back within 12 hours, providing additional intelligence that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Satellite surveillance had identified several cargo shipments moving from former Soviet military bases to facilities controlled by Petrov's business network. The shipments were supposedly humanitarian supplies, but their size and frequency suggested something more than medical equipment and educational materials. Sarah's next objective was to gain direct access to Petrov's operations, moving beyond casual social contact to a more substantial relationship. Elena's journalism background provided an opportunity. She could propose writing a feature article about Petrov's humanitarian work, potentially gaining access to his facilities and personnel. She approached Petrov's public relations representative, a young woman named Katerina Dvorak, who handled media relations for several businesses in Prague. Elena pitched a comprehensive story about successful immigrant entrepreneurs who were giving back to their communities, with Petrov featured as the primary example. Mr. Petrov is very particular about media coverage, Katerina explained during their meeting at a trendy cafe near Prague Castle. He prefers to keep his charitable work private, not seeking publicity or recognition. I understand that, Sarah replied, maintaining Elena's professional enthusiasm. But his story could inspire other successful business people to increase their charitable giving. Sometimes privacy has to be balanced against the potential for positive impact. Katerina promised to discuss the proposal with Petrov, and 3 days later Sarah received an invitation to visit one of the foundation's distribution centers. The facility was located in a warehouse district outside Prague, surrounded by light industrial buildings and shipping companies. The warehouse appeared legitimate, filled with pallets of medical supplies, educational materials, and basic infrastructure equipment. Petrov himself conducted the tour, explaining how donated materials were sorted, packaged, and shipped to various aid organizations throughout Eastern Europe. But Sarah noticed several anomalies that suggested the warehouse had additional functions. Security cameras were more numerous and sophisticated than necessary for a charitable organization. Several areas of the building were restricted, with locked doors and authorized personnel-only signs. Most significantly, she observed loading docks that were sized for large cargo trucks, far beyond what would be needed for typical humanitarian shipments. During the tour, Sarah maintained Elena's journalistic curiosity while carefully observing everything that might provide useful intelligence. She asked questions about logistics, funding sources, and distribution networks, gathering information that would help intelligence analysts understand how Petrov's operation functioned. "We try to be efficient," Petrov explained as they walked through the main warehouse area. "Humanitarian work requires the same attention to logistics and cost management as any business operation." Sarah noticed that several employees appeared to have military backgrounds, moving with the precision and alertness of people with tactical training. They were courteous and professional, but their awareness of visitors suggested security responsibilities that went beyond typical warehouse work. The tour concluded in Petrov's office, a modest space furnished with practical furniture and maps showing aid distribution throughout the region. Sarah conducted a formal interview, asking about Petrov's background, his motivation for humanitarian work, and his plans for expanding the foundation's activities. "I've been fortunate in business," Petrov said. "When you have success, you have responsibility to help others who are less fortunate. This foundation is my way of giving back to communities that need support." The interview provided useful information about Petrov's background and business philosophy, but Sarah was more interested in what she observed during unguarded moments. When Petrov thought she wasn't looking, his expression became harder, more calculating. He answered her questions smoothly, but she sensed constant evaluation, as if he was assessing whether Elena represented any kind of threat to his operations. As Sarah prepared to leave the warehouse, Katerina mentioned that the Foundation was organizing a supply convoy to a refugee camp near the Serbian border. Elena was invited to accompany the convoy as a journalist, documenting the Foundation's humanitarian work for her planned article. Sarah accepted the invitation immediately, recognizing it as an opportunity to observe Petrov's logistics operations in action. But she also understood that the convoy assignment would require her to operate in a more dangerous environment, where any mistakes could have serious consequences. That night, Sarah sent another encrypted report to Colonel Walker, providing detailed observations from the warehouse visit and requesting guidance about the convoy mission. The response came back quickly: "Proceed with the convoy, but exercise extreme caution." Intelligence analysts suspected that Petrov's humanitarian convoys provided cover for weapons trafficking operations, and the convoy route passed through several areas known for criminal activity. 2 days later, Sarah found herself riding in a convoy of 6 large trucks, traveling through rural Czech Republic toward the Serbian border. Elena was officially there as a journalist documenting humanitarian aid delivery, but Sarah was actually conducting reconnaissance on what might be a major weapons trafficking operation. The convoy leader was Milan Cerny, a Czech national who appeared to have extensive military experience. He briefed the convoy personnel about route security, communication procedures, and contingency plans with the precision of someone planning a military operation. His attention to tactical details seemed excessive for a humanitarian supply mission. As the convoy traveled through increasingly remote terrain, Sarah noticed that their route avoided major highways and populated areas, instead following secondary roads that would provide less visibility and fewer security checkpoints. The choice of route made sense for avoiding bureaucratic delays, but it also suggested that the convoy was carrying cargo that wouldn't survive detailed inspection. During a rest stop at a rural truck stop, Sarah overheard a conversation between Milan and one of the truck drivers that made her pulse quicken. They were discussing special packages that needed to be delivered to contacts in Serbia, packages that were more sensitive than the regular supplies. Sarah realized that she had found exactly what she was looking for: direct evidence that Petrov's humanitarian operations provided cover for weapons trafficking. The convoy was carrying both legitimate aid supplies and illegal weapons, using the charitable cover to move dangerous materials across international borders. But she also realized that she was now in serious personal danger. If Petrov's people suspected that Elena was anything other than a legitimate journalist, they would eliminate the threat without hesitation. Sarah was alone, hundreds of kilometers from friendly territory, surrounded by people who would kill her if they discovered her true identity. As the convoy resumed its journey toward the Serbian border, Sarah began planning for multiple contingencies. She had memorized the emergency extraction procedures provided during her mission briefing, but those procedures required her to reach specific communication points that might be inaccessible if the situation deteriorated quickly. The convoy reached its destination, a refugee camp near the Serbian border, just as darkness was falling. The facility was larger than Sarah had expected, housing several thousand people in temporary shelters spread across a valley between low hills. Aid workers moved between the shelters, providing medical care and distributing supplies to families who had fled violence in other parts of the region. Sarah watched as the convoy trucks were unloaded, noting that some cargo was delivered directly to the camp's medical facility, while other packages were transferred to different vehicles that had been waiting at the camp. The transfer operation was conducted with military precision, suggesting that it had been planned and rehearsed in advance. Milan approached Sarah as she photographed the unloading process, ostensibly documenting the humanitarian aid delivery for Elena's article. "Very impressive operation," he said. "Mr. Petrov's foundation is very efficient at getting supplies where they're needed." "The logistics are certainly complex," Sarah replied, maintaining Elena's journalistic perspective. "Moving this much material across international borders requires significant planning and coordination." "Yes," Milan agreed. "And sometimes special arrangements are necessary to avoid bureaucratic delays that could prevent urgent supplies from reaching people who need them immediately." Sarah understood that Milan was describing exactly the kind of special arrangements that would allow weapons to be smuggled along with legitimate humanitarian supplies. But she also recognized that he might be testing her, trying to determine whether Elena was truly the naive journalist she appeared to be. That night, Sarah slept in a tent provided by the camp administration, maintaining her cover as a journalist documenting the aid delivery. But she remained alert, aware that her situation could change rapidly if Petrov's people became suspicious of her activities. Her opportunity came the following morning when Milan announced that the convoy would be returning to Prague via a different route, stopping at several locations to deliver additional supplies. Sarah volunteered to accompany the return journey, explaining that she wanted to document the complete supply chain for her article. But during the return trip, Sarah noticed that one of the trucks was making an unscheduled stop at a remote warehouse facility that wasn't mentioned in any of the humanitarian aid documentation. She watched as several large crates were transferred from the truck to the warehouse, crates that were handled with the care typically reserved for sensitive military equipment. Sarah had found Petrov's weapons storage facility, the location where the anti-aircraft missiles were likely being held before distribution to terrorist organizations. But she had also placed herself in maximum danger, since any attempt to gather detailed intelligence about the facility would expose her to discovery and almost certain death. As the convoy prepared to leave the warehouse area, Sarah made the most important decision of her military career. Using techniques she had learned during her advanced training, she managed to slip away from the convoy during a brief rest stop, disappearing into the surrounding forest before anyone noticed her absence. She had 48 hours to reach the emergency communication point and transmit the location of Petrov's weapons storage facility before the convoy's return to Prague would alert Petrov that Elena Vasquez had disappeared. 48 hours to cover 60 kilometers of hostile territory while avoiding search teams that would certainly be dispatched to find her. Sarah Chun had begun this mission as an inexperienced operative conducting her first real intelligence assignment. She was ending it as a fugitive carrying information that could prevent advanced anti-aircraft weapons from reaching terrorist organizations around the world. As she moved through the Czech forest, using navigation and evasion skills learned during her training, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frustrated spotter on an Afghan hillside to a deep-cover operative conducting strategic intelligence missions, she had proven that individual capability and determination could overcome institutional limitations and traditional role definitions. The emergency extraction would be dangerous, requiring her to evade capture while transmitting critical intelligence that would allow other forces to intercept Petrov's weapons before they reached their intended destinations. But Sarah was confident.